Men and women and children of all races, black and white, could lose their lives. It's a nightmare with which I have to live, that this could be enacted on British soil in Africa.
A year later, Harold Wilson tried to heal the breach. He invited Ian Smith to talks aboard HMS Tiger in the Mediterranean. Once isolated at sea, the plan was to make Smith realize he was a pariah.
The Prime Minister had the Admiral's cabin, the Governor had the Captain's cabin, and both those had large day cabins. And that meant a big bedroom, as would be described in a house, and a big sitting room and a bathroom. Ian Smith was to be given a very small sleeping cabin, perhaps 9 foot by 6 foot, with just room for a bunk.
He'd sort of put us into the second-class quarters, that kind of thing. It didn't worry me. Where in the name of heaven does it worry me? I had a bed and I slept. But he had better quarters, sure.
I think there was a consistent attempt to perhaps to demoralize them a bit. While we were putting the conference table together for the wardroom, I was asked if I could provide 2 chairs, one for Wilson, one for Gibbs, which would be higher than the others and with arms, so that Smith wouldn't have one.
The negotiations started well, with Smith agreeing to steady progress towards majority rule as long as Britain didn't impose a deadline. As a first step, Wilson wanted Smith to abandon his illegal independence and allow authority to be restored in Rhodesia under the British governor. Smith sensed a trap. At one point, negotiations were broken off to allow each side a breather. Smith was invited for a drink with some of the ship's crew.
It was the chief petty officer who held up his glass and said, "Here's to Rhodesia." So, you know, I sort of looked around, but it was serious, and we all drank to Rhodesia. And he then said this to me, and it's still very clear in my mind. He said, "You look surprised. You don't have to be surprised. That I want to tell you that the complement of this ship is, whatever it was it 678, some such number as that?" He said, "I want to tell you that 676 are behind you. The other 2 buggers have gone overboard long ago." Those are the very words that he used to me.
Before disembarking from Tiger, Smith put his signature to a document. Not an agreement, but a record of the discussions that had taken place. Back in Salisbury, he discussed the proposals with his cabinet for a full day before telling Wilson the proposals were repugnant.
So, as you will no doubt have guessed, ladies and gentlemen, the fight goes on.
Tiger was dead. The whites revelled in their new status. As long as their neighbours in South Africa kept them supplied with oil, they believed they could defy the rest of the world. If the weeks of independence could be turned into months, and the months into years, perhaps one day they'd be accepted. But the price was high. 3 years after UDI, I met Mark Vorster, a tobacco farmer. He couldn't sell his crop because of sanctions, and both he and his workforce were at a standstill.
Are all these houses, it's all people who work for you?
Yes.
The village wasn't here when you came to the farm?
There was nothing here at all.
What kind of pleasure do they have apart from working? I mean, what do they do when they have a day off or the weekend?
Well, over the weekends they have beer. Not all of them drink beer, but a large number do. And they do tend to drink to excess. It's certainly one of their pleasures.
The living conditions here look very primitive to an outsider.
Yeah, they probably do. But this is what Africa is used to. And I've often thought I'd like to provide water sanitation, for instance. But most of the Africans haven't really reached the stage where they understand or appreciate or can look after that sort of amenity.
Within 6 months of UDI, black nationalists, trained as guerrilla fighters in neighbouring countries, were mounting their first raids into Rhodesia. South Africa came to the rescue again, sending helicopters and military police to help counter the threat which Prime Minister Vorster thought would spread to South Africa.
Good morning, freedom fighters. Good morning, Commissioner. Here are the news.
Vorster wasn't sentimental about Rhodesia. He helped when it suited him. When the Portuguese pulled out of Mozambique, he saw the days of colonial rule were numbered, and South Africa needed to make allies of the black states. Step one was to get Ian Smith to release his detainees and negotiate. The nationalists were flown to Zambia. In the euphoria of meeting after years in detention, they agreed to bury their differences with a pact, the Unity Accord. But the unity was short-lived. Rival ambitions and disagreements over the tactics needed to defeat Ian Smith soon divided them again.
We didn't feel that unity would be promotive of the armed struggle. We felt it was in fact meant to kill it.
But you accepted it?
Yes, we accepted it. We pretended to accept it. At heart, we didn't. And we said we must play it cleverly.
So you didn't mean a word of it?
Not a word. Not a word. I don't know of anybody in the leadership of ZANU who meant it. I would be surprised.
Next, Vorster called all-party talks, he and Zambia's President Kaunda to act as joint chairman. The feuding nationalist delegation was led by a Methodist bishop, Abel Muzorewa. South Africa had insisted that Ian Smith attend. He did so reluctantly. The talks were held in a railway carriage on the bridge over the Victoria Falls between Zambia and Rhodesia. The nationalist delegation sat at the end of the table in Zambia, Ian Smith at the end in Rhodesia.
And when we got there and we saw what had been laid on, they had every kind of drink in the world there, the things that we hadn't seen for a long time.
To have a whole gang of politicians and terrorists jammed in, but either side of a narrow table, to the extent that if you wanted to go to the other end, you actually had to go out onto the bridge and walk round to the other entrance to the carriage, and it was really ridiculous.
Black and white had never been physically closer, but there was no meeting of minds. Kaunda and Vorster had to accept that their initiative for bringing peace had failed. Ian Smith told the nationalists that in his view the discussions were going nowhere.
Yeah, they were quite happy. They said, let's call it off. So we quietly went out and went back. They didn't quietly go out. They went back into the refreshment place there, and they tell me that before they left, there wasn't a drop of alcohol left in the whole place. They cleaned it out, and they staggered out.
The side that the nationalists had been on, I mean, looked like an occupied country, apparently, with every single thing either broken and certainly eaten, and every drop of liquor, which considerable, was drunk.
Oh, well, I won't deny that at all. We used it, but we were not drunk.
After the failure of the talks, the guerrilla war intensified. Smith's security forces were overstretched. South Africa was still trying to push Smith to do a deal, and it had withdrawn military support. Even the supply of ammunition was restricted. Privately, Ian Smith was under great pressure. Publicly, he toughed it out.
I don't believe in black majority rule ever in Rhodesia. Not in 1,000 years. I repeat, I believe in black and whites working together. If one day it's white